Welcome back, this is Tucker. Let's talk weather. The Atlantic has been unusually quiet, but there are signs that it will not stay that way for very long. And our weather pattern becoming more active now, with temperature swings that I'm watching as we head through the middle of September. To be honest, it's been a little boring for a meteorologist looking out across the US this past week or so, but for a meteorologist in Boston, like myself, we had 5 tornadoes in Massachusetts this past weekend, which may have been the most active weather anywhere in the lower 48 over the past, feels like 7 to 14 days. And right now, too, it is pretty quiet out there, but as always, we look forward in these forecasts, so I'm going to get you ready for the changes that take place in the middle of September, and there are some that you might not see coming, so we're going to jump into everything that I want you to know about right now. We're starting you off with a look at the tropics and hurricane activity, which, if you didn't know, is normally at its peak on September 10th, except this year, with the 0 named storms ongoing on September 10th, again, the peak on average of hurricane season, it was just one of a few times that we haven't had any activity on that date over the past 50 years or so. Very unusual. Now, as we take a look at what's happening at this moment, you can see we do have some signs of life here. The National Hurricane Center giving this wave coming off Africa a 30% chance of developing into a named storm in the next week. And that's where our forecast is going to begin. And to be honest, there may also be some signs of life out here in the Gulf too. So let's get a look at everything that we're going to need to watch over the next couple of weeks. If you've watched me for a while, you know I love the ensembles. They're not as flashy as some of the fear-mongering graphics some people will show you. And I don't like when people do that. So that's why we show you this. It really gives you a good level-headed approach to forecasting some of these tropical systems. And I'll explain why right here. What you're looking at is our system coming off Africa. This is on the 14th, so this upcoming Sunday. Each one of those red numbers indicates a potential outcome, because there's not just one outcome for these storms, there's a million. So we kind of capture it right here. And we're going to watch as each of those red numbers indicates the core of one of these storms, a potential outcome for where the storm's headed and how strong it's going to be. And as you can see, we do have a pretty decent chance that this storm is going to develop, because even 7 days out, it's still present, and very few of those numbers have disappeared. So our model's saying conditions are favorable for storm development, and they really are. There's not a lot of shear in the Pacific or in the Atlantic right now to cut down on these storms. So we're going to move this forward, and the good news here is that this storm is a ways away. And what's going to happen at this point is actually pretty uncertain. You can see on September, between the 20th and 22nd, some of our solutions take it a little farther west. Some of them just go straight out to sea. So right now, if you hear people hyping this one up, they don't know what they're talking about, or at least they're doing that to scare you. Because at this point, my only point is that, while there is a good chance the storm develops, it's really anyone's guess what happens beyond September 20th or so. So we're going to leave it at that for now. I will add, though, you saw maybe in the beginning, and if you didn't, I'm going to go back a little bit. Some of these numbers begin to pop up sort of outside of the Gulf right here on the East Coast. There could be a weak system that develops. It wouldn't become anything strong, but something to keep an eye on towards the middle of this week. I don't think anything's going to come of it, but it is something to at least note. Maybe some rain and wind on the Georgia and Carolina coastlines as a system kind of emerges out of the Gulf. But other than that stuff, the tropics are pretty quiet for now. Don't let anyone on the internet scare you into thinking anything else at this point. We're going to take a look at a very interesting upper level pattern we call the Omega block. But before we go further, if you haven't subscribed, consider doing so. You'll get good level headed forecasts here. I'll leave it at that. What I'm going to show you is the air masses in our atmosphere, and these air masses dictate the temperatures that we experience at the surface. I'll show you these blue colors. They indicate colder than average weather, and the orange colors indicate warmer than average weather, but it's not just the surface temperatures, it's really the temperatures across the entire atmosphere. But what the important thing is here is that these upper air masses, like I said, determine everything that happens at the ground. And what we're going to be seeing, especially as we get into the middle of this week, is a picture-perfect Omega block. And what that is when the jet stream, it wiggles south of these colder air masses, it rises north with the warmer temperatures, and when it forms this shape here, kind of looks like the Greek letter omega, right? You can see the warmer weather here in the middle of the country, and the colder than average air masses are stormier air masses to the west and east of that ridge. Now, Omega blocks are big pieces in our weather because when the jet stream gets all wiggly like that, it has a harder time moving. It's like when you kink a hose, okay? It doesn't allow the water to pass through. So you're going to see this dominate our weather for a lot of this week. And while it's not as obvious here as we move into the 16th, the 17th, the end of the week, there is still clearly the jet stream making that dip south here. The ridge shifts a little bit farther east, and then we continue to see this warmer weather really migrate slowly from the Midwest towards the East Coast, and stormier than average conditions in the West and in the Rockies, and some of that will get into the Northeast here too. But this is going to persist for some time and really dominate our weather. Even here, when it's not as obvious as we get into next week on our pattern here, but even into perhaps the 20th, I'm still looking at the jet stream making that general omega blocking shape. It'll break down slowly but surely, but this is going to really keep some areas quite warm and some areas quite stormy heading through the next 10 days, which we'll take a closer look at right now. I'm going to keep this one simple and just give you a future cast, but you'll see the omega block playing out. And what you're going to notice off the bat here is actually some of the storms and rainfall in the Rockies. That's partially because of the storminess. And where we have that ridge, it is noticeably quieter here in the, we'll call it the Midwest, and slowly migrating to the East Coast, that quieter weather too. Actually, the Northeast happens to be quiet for now as well. Moving this farther through the week, you can see that continued storminess sort of on the western edge of this. There could be some strong to severe storms that emerge on the lee side of the Rockies here as we get into this week too. So if you live in the plains, something to make note of Sunday, Monday, even Tuesday. And a couple of these storms in the Pacific will be coming onshore on the West Coast. Meanwhile, generally quiet in the Midwest and East Coast. Continuing to move this forward, looking at now Monday and Tuesday, the start of the week. No huge systems here. Generally speaking, even with the omega block in place, it's going to remain on the quieter side, but there will be a better chance for storms to slide into the West Coast where we do not have that ridge in place. But where we do, you can see it kind of, right here. That's where we're going to have the quieter weather. And again, this slowly shifts to the east as we go through the week. So good news for the Midwest, great news for the East Coast. If you want the quiet, comfortable, nice fall weather, there's going to be plenty of that. And that doesn't really change heading into the following weekend either. But it does impact temperatures as well. So before we end this, I'm going to show you those temps. And you're going to find some spots actually get kind of cold this week. And we'll give you a fall foliage preview. And that is going to be impacted too. So we'll start here with Friday high temperatures. You got 80s and 90s in those brown colors. That, again, is your ridge, allowing that warm air to really launch northwards. We're talking 90s into the Dakotas here in September. It happens, just doesn't happen that often. Meanwhile, you can see exactly where that colder air mass is, keeping us in the 70s for highs, even 60s in the Rockies, and 70s for highs on the northeastern portion of the country. Actually, a lot of the East Coast, even down to the Carolinas, may not get into the 80s. So that is your omega block in real time right there. Low temperatures get onto the chillier side too. You're looking at 40s, even some 30s in the Rocky Mountains. We're looking at 40s and 50s in the East Coast. And then we get back to the heat heading into Saturday. In fact, we're talking highs in the mid-90s across a lot of the Midwest. Again, that's your omega block in play. We'll skip forward a little more because you're going to see the same pattern play out. I'm going to move this into the start of the week. So here's your Monday. Still looking at 90s across a lot of the Midwest. You can see this is slowly shifting to the east. Meanwhile, on the West Coast, these are your high temperatures we're looking at out there. Warm, still looking at 80s and 70s, but no hot weather unless you're in the valley or the southwestern U.S., which kind of always gets hot, you know what I mean? But certainly this omega block in play here. Skipped forward an extra day. There's Tuesday. We're moving this into Wednesday. And I'll go into one more day, Thursday next week. So we're looking a ways out now, but still got that same area of warmth. Generally the Midwest, some of the East Coast, although the Northeast isn't quite going to get in on this warmth. But you can tell still, for a lot of time, the weather that you get locked into to end this week and to go into the weekend is what we're going to be stuck with heading into the following weekend. So what you have basically Friday, Saturday is what you're going to have until the next Friday, Saturday. So I hope you'll like it, and I just want to make sure you're prepared for this now. And last but not least, a fan favorite, our foliage update. This is from Explore Fall, by the way. That's where we get our data. And we are beginning to see some color in the north central U.S. And no doubt the polar vortex we just had helped to spur that on. We had temperatures in the 30s on a couple of occasions out there. We've also had some cooler weather, of course, in the higher elevations like the Rockies, and that's where we're seeing some color pop up here as well. And if you take a really close look, I'll help you out and zoom in. Look at this. Our first signs of moderate color in the U.S. in the Rocky Mountains to the west of Denver. Yeah, we're still a ways away everywhere else, but fall is beginning to show signs of life, and this will accelerate a lot as we head into the end of the month. And that's all she wrote this week. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you got something out of the video. As always, let me know where you're watching from, and if you have any questions, drop them in the comments. I'll be sure to get back to each and every one of you, and I appreciate you being here. So I'll see you hopefully right back here next time.